Well, welcome everyone to another conversation and meditation later on. I am Jan Jeremias, one of your hosts today. I'm an integrative health and wellness coach and author who works with people and their pets to help empower them to overcome health challenges and live healthier lives. I'm really excited to be joined on stage with my co-host, collaborator, and friend, the amazing and very kind Mary Jane McQueen. Mary Jane, share with everyone a little bit about yourself, and then we will move on.
Thank you, Jan. Yeah, it's always wonderful to be here in presence with all of you, and as always, I'm happy to be here with my friend Jan Jeremias, who, as you know, inspires me every day because she just is an inspiration. That's all I can say. And she shines brightly because I have to mention that because that's her weekly reminder of her of her motto for the year. But yeah, so I'm Mary Jane or MJ. I'm the founder of an MJ McQueen Creative Studio, and as a graphic designer, I help entrepreneurs step into their light and share their gifts authentically, and I help to guide clients in overcoming self-doubt and finding their voice so that we can co-create some visuals that align with their mission, and so that when you connect with your true self, you connect more deeply with others. So welcome everyone.
Mary Jane, did you want to share our poem for today?
I will. I was it's I was like I moved screens and I was trying to find it. um
Mhm.
yeah, tech challenges. So the poem for today is called The Walls We Build. And I'm probably not going to say the name right, but it's by Karajan. But this is The Walls We Build. Brick by brick, the stones are laid to the many walls in our life we build. Every agony and joy we feel adds mortar to the foundations. We toil away day and night, surviving through each passing moment. We mince our words, hiding behind society's proprieties. Another brick is laid, another wall is built for every harshness we bottle up inside. The guy who slams into you on the sidewalk then calls you a nasty name for his mistake. The teenager who laughs at you while you're walking home from the store when your grocery bag rips open. Every comment you swallow, every time you fall a step behind, it adds up inside our minds. And yet, one more wall is built. But the walls that are the hardest to break through are the ones we build because of those we love. Every Dear John letter, every I won't be home tonight, I have to work late. Every time your better half is seen hanging all over some tall, lean fellow at the bar. The walls build and build without reprieve. And then one day, you find yourself alone. You find yourself in the dark with nothing but walls around you. You see, we are all quite good at building walls, but there is one thing we always forget, and that is to build ourselves a door.
What a powerful, powerful poem to begin our time together today. And so, welcome everyone to the walls we create, boundaries within and boundaries without. We're so grateful you're here today joining this conversation about boundaries, how we set them, how we honor them, and how they shape our relationships with ourselves and others. And lately, I've been reflecting on boundaries a lot, on the nature of boundaries. And we often think of them as walls, hard, solid, immovable. But what if we saw them differently? What if instead of rigid barriers, we viewed them as living, breathing structures, firm yet flexible? strong yet delicate. Brene Brown so wisely said, clear boundaries are kind, unclear boundaries are unkind. When we set clear boundaries, we honor not only our own needs, but also those of others. Boundaries protect our energy and well being, but they are not meant to isolate us. In fact, when we hold too tightly to them, without openness or awareness, we risk operating blindly within them, unable to see or understand the boundaries of those around us. Having set up my own walls, both within myself and with others, I've come to realize with time and patience that some of these walls were ones I had constructed out of fear, protection, and uncertainty. But slowly, brick by brick, we can begin to dismantle some of these walls, not all at once, but gently, so that we open up ourselves and allow the world to see who we truly are. But boundaries aren't just about protecting ourselves, they're also about creating healthy, respectful relationships with others. Clear boundaries help us communicate our needs with kindness while also honoring the needs of those around us. They teach us where we end and another person begins. They remind us that we don't have to absorb others' emotions, nor do we have to allow guilt or fear to dictate our decisions. When we set boundaries from a place of self-awareness and compassion, they become an act of mutual respect, one that fosters deeper trusts, understanding, and authenticity in our connections. So today, let's explore what it means to create boundaries that are firm yet pliable, boundaries that give us the space we need while still allowing for growth, connection, and deeper understanding. Let's reflect on the walls we've built, the ones that have protected us, and the ones that may now be keeping us from moving forward. So we invite you all to enter this space with curiosity and compassion for yourself and for others. Let's listen, share, and learn together. Mary Jane?
Yeah, it's such a I feel it's a really important conversation that we're having today, as we sort of alluded to at the end of our conversation last week, was about how important it is really to set boundaries. I mean, there's boundaries that we put in place that maybe we need to let go of, but it really is essential for, for personal well-being, and fostering meaningful relationships. It's not always about keeping people out. It's just setting the guidelines for how what we feel to be acceptable behaviors within our boundaries, and it is a production, of course. But we also need that sense of safety, which allows us to engage with others in a way that feels really balanced and healthy. That's really what it comes down to, but that doesn't make boundaries easy to set or to take down sometimes, because there's so many things that factor into that, as well. I mean, one of the primary ones that I could think of right off the top of my head is that, sometimes we're afraid to set a boundary, a really defined boundary with somebody, because we have a fear of, like, that there's going to be some sort of conflict or rejection, that people are not going to understand why we're setting those boundaries, and often the human condition makes us want to avoid confrontation whenever possible. And a little bit of, I guess, that factors in is that we can feel a little bit guilty about wanting to set those boundaries. A little bit of it, I guess, sometimes can come from um, wanting to people please, in the sense of, feeling like we shouldn't be prioritizing, if I could speak, our own needs, and you know, that condition where we feel like, the times where we want to say no, but we say yes, or vice versa. So that's
Yeah.
just my sort of feedback on that.
Thank you, Mary Jane. And I want to thank Seamus, had sent me an article, so I really appreciated that. And the quote I knew because I have read some stuff about boundaries from Brene Brown. And so, but thank you for that also. And then also to thank you to Zara, because I think she brought it up at the end of last week's conversation about boundaries and setting boundaries. And I do think boundaries I think, it's so interesting as we were preparing, Mary Jane and I, is like how I always perceive boundaries as being these like literally like, I think I'm very literal. So almost like these fences, these walls we put up. And I think the more I read and the more I thought about them and kind of looked at boundaries in my own life, and is that sort of that breathable or that kind of, almost like that movable wall, that it has to have a little bit of space within that wall, because as we change, our boundaries change. And I can think of personal situations where when I was insecure or feeling very fragile or frail, how I had put up a wall, and that was absolutely a wall of safety. And then as I became stronger, I could dismantle that wall a little bit. And I could, all of a sudden the wall changed because it really wasn't a boundary anymore. It was a much more flexible boundary within reason, obviously. And I think one of the things that you said, Mary Jane, is I think that when we are setting boundaries, and it is not necessarily easy to set a boundary, is to communicate them well. As you said, sometimes people don't understand the boundaries we put out. And so we have to learn how to communicate them and how we share with people, like you're crossing a boundary. Because I think otherwise it just feels like mysterious. It's kind of like, well, why is this person distancing themselves from me? Or why aren't they communicating? And, there is no reason and no association. So I think we have to be clear about the boundaries we set. And then we have to be able to carry through on those boundaries. I'm thinking about, it's kind of like, obviously everybody knows I love dogs, and that's one thing that I've learned with Tonka is I have direct rules or boundaries, and he's going to push those rules or boundaries. I mean, he's going to be 13 next week, and he still pushes them. I mean, he knows what he needs to do to get fed, but he's still going to push it so that he thinks I forget and I'll get tired and then I'll kind of not pay attention. And so, but it is that kind of constant. I think that if we set a boundary, we just have to be willing to, stick to it, because then I think nobody's going to honor that boundary. It's kind of like giving a kid a rule, rules, and then not carrying through. So yeah, that's a little bit about what I had to share in response to what you said, Mary Jane. Anybody else want to, feel free to come up and join us in the conversation. We'd love to hear from you. Go ahead, Mary Jane.
Yeah, it's sometimes it's really difficult too because I mean, depending culturally, and then family conditioning as to, where boundaries may not have necessarily been modeled very effectively. And so sometimes it's a challenge when we're working to develop those as an adult because it feels like such an uncertain or gray area that that you may not necessarily know exactly where to set the boundaries. So, but as we've discussed before, it's all about the living and the learning. That's what it's about. And Orska, you had something to share?
I'm just
I
gonna
do.
Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jan. Go ahead.
no, I was just gonna comment on Mary Jane and then move on to you, Ursula. No, I just wanted to say, like, and because I can think of an example when I had to set some sort of rules or boundaries, being self-employed or an entrepreneur. Um, I remember when my parents periodically have gotten ill, I'm the one who, quote unquote, doesn't have a real job because I have a lot more flexibility, which, go figure. So all the care always was reliant on me, and I had to communicate with kindness. Yes, I work for myself, but if I don't work, I don't get paid. So unlike, my brothers who both had regular jobs and maybe had a little bit less flexibility, they were on salary. So it was a little bit different. And I had to kind of communicate to everyone, I'm glad to go down, but, you have to remember that this affects me greatly. And just to communicate that. And it wasn't like I wasn't going to go, but I think there was a boundary there that I had to set of like, okay, I'm glad to go and I feel honored to go, but, you know, it's not like it's not like I'm unbelievably, independently wealthy and can afford that necessarily. So those boundaries that have to be, sometimes we have to communicate and communicate with kindness, which, I'm still working on. Well, not the kindness part, the communication part. Orsica, go ahead.
Yeah, this is just so timely. But first and foremost, for everybody on the call, just so you know, it's pronounced with an SH sound. It looks like Orsica, but it's Orshika. So there
Oh,
you go. Anyway,
thank you.
yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. Most people, it's so funny, right? Because those were, speaking of boundaries, that was like a boundary that I had to set as a child, and I was always so nervous because I was raised in a culture where children are more to be seen than heard, right? And to correct people on the proper pronunciation was scary as a child. So now as an adult, that's a wall, right? So timely for that too. That's a wall that was built up. So, but it's lovely to see that adults are much more receptive and they're like, "Oh, thank you for helping." And I'm like, "Yeah, of course." Anyway, that's not why I'm on here. The setting boundaries thing, right, was I was my mom's emotional support human. I'm the baby of the family. And I would call her out of obligation every single day. And then one day I was like, why am I doing this? This is not healthy for me mentally, emotionally, because you just never know what was going to happen in those calls. But I did it anyway out of obligation. And then, I don't know, a couple of years ago, I just straight up told her from a place of love, but I was like, hey, mom, I'm not going to call you every day. And her pushback, just like a dog, just like a toddler, was you do this every time you start dating someone new. And I'm like, actually, Craig encourages me to call you. Sorry, Craig encourages me to call you every day. I'm the one who's making this decision because it's just no longer serving me in a healthy way. And she didn't understand that. And it's taken a couple of years for her to respect that boundary. Just because, up to this point, I called her pretty much every day for pretty much my entire adult life. And even still, every once in a while, just like Jan was saying with her dog, who at 13 years old knows what he needs to do before he gets fed, my mom will still every once in a while spit out, "Well, I just miss you so much." I'm like, great, the phone goes both ways. So she's learning to call me now because it used to be just me calling her. So it's interesting when you put those boundaries up. And my mom's in her late 70s and I'm in my early 50s. And it's interesting how the dynamic changes, but it's doable as long as we're consistent with it, right? And I'm sure that's what MJ and Jan are both saying, like, be consistent with your boundaries. And it's so hard to, like, not go back to the old pattern because the pattern is comfortable and it's familiar. Now I feel like I'm taking over the call, and I don't mean it that way at all. Um, but yeah, setting boundaries even with your adult parents, um, it's tough, but it's worth it because now I don't feel the stress every day of like, oh, I gotta call mama. What shoe is gonna drop this time, or what slap across the face are we gonna get? And she's not like that all the time, but you never know when she is, right? And it's just a much calmer existence for me where um, I can control really when I'm ready emotionally to have a conversation that I never know which way it's going to go. And I also time my conversations. So I'm like, okay, I've got 20 minutes to get to the store. So I'll call mama and then I have to hang up because I'm in the store. So that's a boundary that I've set, which seems to work very, very well. That's it.
Yeah, go ahead, Mary Jane, and then I'll
I
go, and
was
then we'll
just
have.
going to say thank you, Orshika, for saying, I hope I said
Thank
that
you. You did. Thanks.
right. But thank you for clarifying that because sometimes you don't know when we see people's names what is, but it's okay because my name is Mary Jane, and I don't want to tell you how many times in my life I've had to tell people my name is not Mary Ann because I'm thinking, but it says anyway.
Yeah, I get
And it's
it.
not even like hidden. So I'm like, okay. So I understand. I remember being a child, it's like, no, it's Mary Jane. So, but I love
Right.
that. But yeah, it's really important. And no, you weren't taking over the call, but it's true. I just popped something in the chat because, right, because I was just thinking about It's like what drains my energy, what makes me feel, where you need more space. I mean, and kudos to you for putting that Al's calling me Spider-Man's girlfriend. Yes, MJ, that's me. Um but yeah, thank you for sharing that because it's true. It's sometimes it is a very difficult conversation, and sometimes even if we're not feeling guilty about our decision to set our boundaries, sometimes, as you've mentioned, the guilt can come the other way saying, well, it's just because. And so, yeah, it's a learning process. That's all I have to say.
It so is a learning process. And thank you, Orshika. And I also acknowledge and really honor the correction. Everybody always says, for me, I have, and it's kind of people mispronounce my name, and you wouldn't think that it would be so hard because it's so short. And so it's kind of funny. I think that um, how we do the best we can, and you have to be kind in your correction. But I think that it's important that people kind of call you what you're meant to be called, um, as far as names go, because I think they do truly have meaning. But one of the things I wanted to share, yes, and I'll share another, so I'll share another personal story, which happened quite recently. My parents are very religious. Um, and so I've been having some challenges, and I left. A lot of you know that I left practicing religion. I consider myself very spiritual. I pray in my own way. Um, I honor what everybody does. Nothing is better than nothing. Everybody makes a choice. And so my mother says to me, and maybe if you prayed, everything would change. And I'm sitting there and okay, that was one thing. Okay, I kind of didn't say much about that comment in our conversation until in the mail, she sent me two prayer books. And she said something to me on the phone, and I had to literally say, Mom, I made a choice a long time ago, and that's a boundary you cannot cross. Like, that is something that I am not willing to, that is like a firm foundation of my belief system. Like, I'm not going there. And I appreciate it, but that's not who I am. And in some ways, it hurts because it's kind of like, doesn't she see who I am by now? I'm like, you know, I'm in my early 60s. My mother is going to be 90. Like, you would think by now, but I didn't say it unkindly. It was just like, that's not a wall that's not a boundary. That's a crossable boundary. There's no breathing room in there right now. Like, I mean, not in a bad way, but that's just, like I said, it is my foundation. It's who I am. So, yeah. So, Seamus.
Yeah, thanks, Jan. And yeah, I empathize Arshika as well with your name because I've had a lifetime of Seamus and Seamus this and Seamus that, and there is a silent H in my name as well. So yeah,
Mhm.
I empathize with the having the courage, let's say, to provide a correction back. And and again, I agree with Jan. I think it's important. It's like your identity. Your name is like what you identify yourself to the world as, and I think it's important. And to gently remind people of how it's pronounced, I think is perfectly reasonable and expected and welcomed, honestly, as well. So yeah, I've done that several times before, Arshika, and I think people feel relieved when we do take the time to say it's Seamus and not Seamus. So thanks for that. I love the theme of the poem, Mary Jane, the idea of walls and bricks and the whole process of building the wall within ourselves. And I was kind of thinking about a house and it has internal walls and external walls. And we can apply that, I think, to our own lives. And I was thinking through the conversation so far about, how often, going back to what Janet mentioned, when we think about boundaries, we think about solid pieces of infrastructure, solid things that separate us, that divide us. But they really there's and again so much of what Janet said there about, well, yeah, that's one perspective, but um they also have the ability to separate, but they also have the ability to bind us and to connect us. And I think that's where the feature of being pliable and porous is so important, because it kind of goes counter to how we often perceive boundaries. How could a solid boundary be porous? Does that not take away from the whole effect of what is the nature of a of or is the property of our essential property of an effective boundary, so I think there's so much learning in that, in beginning to identify the internal boundaries, let's say the internal walls of what we create inside ourselves, and do that work safely within ourselves. I think we can, through today's conversations and having conversations with others, having the courage to be clear about how we've come to create the boundaries within ourselves. And we can do that work ourselves in our own time. So I think that's a lovely example of being able to actually look at the internal walls in our house and how we can actually begin to see how they were created and how we might begin to make changes in those without necessarily anyone outside our house knowing what's going on. And I think that can be a great piece or invitation to kind of in our own space and time, and pace, decide and review and evaluate what boundaries we've got going on within ourselves. And that can be the fuel then, I think, for us to look at examining the boundaries we have with others. And those the exterior wall boundaries of our home, of our apartment or a home or a house, wherever we are, maybe a little bit less porous. We may have a little bit, they maybe need to be more rigid, maybe because we're dealing with other people and engaging with other people and honoring our own boundaries that we build within ourselves. And then we're allowing those boundaries to be examined and to be critiqued, maybe, and checked as we engage with other people's perspectives and other people's boundaries as well. So I think there's room in that external wall around our external boundaries to have those points of pliability as we engage and are ready to uh, honor our boundaries, honor our inner and those external outer boundary walls, but at the same time be open to when we engage with other persons' boundaries, that we have the ability, and John mentioned this, we have the ability to be able to actually be pliable and flexible and adaptable enough and delicate enough to be able to merge and accept the perspectives and the boundaries and mesh with the boundaries of another person's perspective. And it goes back, I think, to the story you told with your mum, Jan. I was thinking about this in this context of, honoring another person's perspective may take a long time. And I think that's when the magic happens, when that penny drops of your mum realizing, oh, okay, like, yeah, I now I get it. Jan has made that conscious choice based on what's important to her. And it might necessarily be aligned with her own beliefs and boundaries and convictions. But I think that's when the magic happens, when both boundaries are so porous that each begins to see how they can create an effective mesh. And the boundaries aren't in conflict, they actually create that opening that allows both boundaries to kind of be open enough to retain the honoring of the individual boundaries, but open enough to be able to actually see and acknowledge the boundary and perspective of the other person as well. I think it's a moving feast, and I think, as we talked about last week, it changes from situation, from moment to moment. But I think it's in the noticing and coming from clarity around our own boundaries that we're prepared to actually engage dynamically with the boundaries of other people as well, I suppose.
Thank you so much, Seamus, because that was absolutely beautiful. And I think so much of what you shared, obviously it was just phenomenal. But, a few things that kind of came to me as you were talking is that one is that, the boundaries we create, and that's to be sort of self-compassionate for those boundaries, for the reason they were created and why we created them, if we created them within ourselves. And usually it was that whole idea of protection and safety. And I think we have to honor, you used the word honor, and I think we have to honor that. We have to accept that, not in a critical way. It's kind of like, oh, okay, well, where I was at that time, that boundary was really important to me. I needed that safety. But then to realize as we grow and as we expand and as we hopefully evolve, that that boundary may change. And I think what you shared about that, sort of like that mesh, the kind of union almost of two people with that come with, you know, sort of firm boundaries and, kind of share those boundaries. That's where true relationship and communication happens. And it reminds me of just our actual physical body that I was thinking about. There are boundaries between organ systems. You have the blood-brain barrier, you have the respiratory and the heart, the pulmonary and cardiovascular system that are encased in a layer of tissue that kind of separates it from other areas of the body. But then, yet, there's always ways that communication or comes through. You have, the blood system and the nervous system, which penetrates all those systems. And so those systems or those boundaries are malleable or porous to some extent and that communication, those boundaries are needed because you can't have digestive organs up in the respiratory system, up near the lungs. But they're also pliable and movable and porous at the same time. I love getting examples from the body because it's brilliant. Darlene.
Jan, I love that you're sharing that right now because I was going to say that I was taking some trauma course not too long ago, and one of the things that they talked about was boundaries and a great analogy in order to present to people, which is just that, thinking of boundaries like a cell wall. If we have a cell that is working in good order, that cell wall will keep out what we don't need. And that cell wall will take in what we do need and use that, to nurture our bodies. And if we think about boundaries in that way, that there's, that opportunity to pull in what we need and be aware of what's going on externally, but that, it softens it a little bit. For me anyway, when I think about it in my mind of a cell wall, just gently guiding in what's needed and then not letting in, softly not letting in what I do not need and what is not for my good. And it just shifted. It was just a really powerful way to shift it, and shift that dialogue so that if people I know a lot of my clients struggle. It's funny, boundaries this week and last week have been top of the list for my coaching clients. And I just actually got a text message literally 5 minutes ago from a client talking about a boundary that she set that she's feeling like she needs to shift. And I think when we think about it, sometimes in that softer sense as well too, there's a little bit more pliability there where it doesn't feel like if we've not taken our boundaries, if we've let perhaps something overstep our boundaries, it's okay. It's that ebb and flow, that shift, right? That it might not sometimes be perfect, but it's going to softly pull in what we need and push out. It almost makes me feel like it's like a breath, right? We're breathing it in what we need, we're breathing out what we don't.
Well, I love that like that example of looking at it as breathing. I think about, breathable walls, you know, and the fact that, if we even look to nature, I mean, you know, rivers need banks, otherwise you have a river that overflows. But then rivers also have the ability to change route,
Hmm.
depending on the flow of the water. And so, if we look outside of ourselves, we can see examples of boundaries that are boundaries that are kind. Mary Jane?
Was that my lead in, the word kind?
Yes, it was.
I love that. I really love the conversation, and I too, I loved being able to um, sort of picture, visualize in the body, and I was also going to comment with Darlene of the mentioning of breath. It's like taking in what we need and releasing what we no longer need, or just or it isn't needed at this time, at least. And yeah, I just love that. And for some reason, when we were talking about permeable walls, it made me think of when I go camping in the summertime, where the airflow continues to come in through the tent, even though there are boundaries set there. So it just reminded me, it just brought a little smile to my face thinking about that, how it might not be a fortress wall, but it's meant to be keep out some things, but apparently it doesn't keep out all things. So I just loved the conversation today. It's great. And I see Divine has her hand raised, so I'm please feel free.
I am free. Hello, my loves.
I love that.
Thank you so much. Yes, boundaries. Oh my goodness. That word boundaries. And I love how everybody just explained it and talked about different scenarios and how they've experienced setting boundaries, with themselves too. I think about setting boundaries with myself, and we can no longer do this anymore, Divine, and we have to do things differently sometimes. So it gets easier. It gets easier, especially with yourself, your family, the people who are in your home, because the people who are in our environment, in our home, in our workplace affect us the most, right? But I had a situation yesterday. But before I get into that situation that I had, I want to say that for me, I really don't use the word boundaries anymore because I noticed whenever I started saying boundaries, 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 that I was putting up borders, and I call it like borders to where nobody can get in around my heart space. So I always want to make sure that I'm leaving my heart open, but at the same time, listening to the signal and the intuition in my heart on what I need to protect as well, right? So I think the boundaries are just another form of protection, but we do got to be mindful of how we also create these borders, right? These brick walls, these borders. And it gets harder to listen to our intuition on what we need, especially if our ego has been wounded, right? The inner child. So it's funny how you guys are bringing up all these things, right? It's not funny, really. It's no such thing as a coincidence, right? But there's a lot of planetary action that is taking place right now when it comes to retrogrades. We got Mercury in retrograde, we got Venus in retrograde, and these signs are very much in boundaries. They're in boundaries. They're being assertive, and a lot of people are Mars driven right now. So there's a lot of expression with Mars driven energy, like you're taking action, you're expressing yourself. We are no longer tolerating certain things that we did from the past, whether that be past childhood, past situations, relationships, career, job situations, partnerships, whatever it may be. And a lot of people are standing in their power, and honing in on what they no longer want to tolerate or deal with. And it may be difficult sometimes. And sometimes we may feel guilty, especially me as a parent. I set boundaries with my children. I'll be like, wait. And then my daughter likes to give me the pity party afterwards. And I have to be firm on that. You know what I'm saying? And I have to be in that neutral space. I always say when you set a boundary, be in a neutrality. Do not look at it as a good or a bad thing. You know what I'm saying? So that also has helped me. But yesterday, a parent knocked on my door. Okay. Now, I'm a very peaceful, pleasant, loving person. I'm all about harmony and respect. So when people come to me, I do expect that in return, but that's not always the case, especially when we don't know our neighbors like that, right? So she knocked on my door because there was an older man who was 43 years old. I found out he's 43 years old, and I seen my 10-year-old daughter very close to him outside, side by side, very close, like there was nobody there but them two, and they were playing together. Now, keep in mind, this man is 43 years old, but he also has a health condition, which I wasn't about to label him because I don't label people and I don't assume things without the facts and the information. So I just addressed it, the 43-year-old man. He was with his 12-year-old niece that always is with him. Come to find out, she's just like kind of like his caregiver or his just companion, as whatever, because he's autistic. Now, I knew there was something, but again, I don't label people, right? I don't assume things. So I addressed the man and I asked him to not get that close to my daughter anymore. I said it in a very respectful, very kind way. I asked both of them, are they okay? Are they good with what I just said? I said, you guys can be cordial, but please do not get too close to my daughter anymore. I said, she's 10 years old and you're 43. So I left her, everything was fine. And then, an hour later, grandmother knocks on the door, mother, grandmother, somewhere around there. And, it's just very, I'm aware this was a test for me because sometimes we get tests, right? And I'm about to land it here because sometimes we get tests. And when she knocked on my door, immediately she was attacking me like she was wounded because she said, you confronted my daughter, and then he's 43, but he's autistic and he's not like that and he won't do that and da 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 da. And it was immediately, it was like, you shoulda, you shoulda, you shoulda, you shoulda. She was basically telling me and shoulding me like I was a child. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like just talking to me very disrespectfully. And I stayed calm. And I looked at her and I interrupted her politely and said, ma'am, I did not know his health condition. I understand that, but I still have to stay firm and say Jocelyn is not allowed that close to that man because he's still considered a grown adult in a grown body. I don't have no other issue with, Jocelyn playing with the 12-year-old, even speaking to the man, hello, how you doing? But being that close to him in his presence around his grown adult body, I do not want that for her. She was like, okay, well, don't tell Jocelyn, don't come to my house no more. Like very petty and, just behaviors that I have dismissed in the past decades ago. And I've seen it circling back around just because we heal a certain aspect of ourselves and some type of form of energy or behavior comes back around, how you address it will be your test. So I just figured I wanted to share that and I had to stay firm on my boundary, even though I understand that he had a health condition and he may not be thinking like a 43-year-old, but it's very important to know that he's still in an adult body and we have to keep a little boundary and separation there. Oh, all right, sisters. Thank you for letting me to share, guys. I landed there.
Oh, thank you for sharing, Divine. I think we do. We do have to, if we feel strongly, it's not necessarily easy. We do have to, maintain those boundaries if it's important to us, especially when I think it crosses some aspect of our, let's say, our foundation or our values. Uh, I think there is, it's not like she was crossing, I want to say this wall or this boundary that wasn't important. It was like, oh, okay, well, if they do it, they do it, and if they don't, they don't. I mean, you were very committed and very firm in what you believed, and you did it in a kind way, which is, all also very important. And so I think that, it was like the boundary I created with my mother when, in that conversation. And I often wonder, because this is obviously not a new thing that's happened, at least for me, in my circumstance. It's been happening for, many, 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 many years. And I do think things come around, kind of remind us to stay firm and committed in what we believe and what we value and what's important to us. Because I think sometimes we kind of go through life and we forget. Life gets busy and whatever, and then circumstances happen or life happens, and life says, okay, just a reminder, you know, you have to stay strong.
Yes, and sometimes they're not such gentle reminders either. As I was listening to
Absolutely.
Divine, really, it is important. Like, I mean, we have to set what's gonna allow us peace in our bodies, so that and as long as we're basing our boundaries on like a mutual respect and with a focus on the well-being of all. I mean, I that's that's perfectly acceptable. And but I just thank you for sharing that because it's true, you know. Yeah, sometimes sometimes those reminders, yeah, I just kept thinking sometimes those reminders are not that gentle.
I agree with you. They're not. And
They
you
are.
know,
Sometimes they're little taps. Sometimes they're like, okay, you're not listening. Well, okay, let me just give you a little shove then.
I was going to say sometimes they're a little tap and sometimes they're a hammer over the head, you know. Like a
Yeah, and the
reminder.
word frying pan came into my
Exactly, exactly. Like remember. And so, but one of the, I do like the idea of, I love the word you used, Mary Jane, and that was the word respect. And I think that, let's say, with, when I made the comment, like, I'm like, doesn't my mother realize or whatever? And I think that that's where, that whole idea of honor and respect comes in, because I think there are like, and then when you do cross somebody's boundary, you know, are you willing to like, basically say to someone, like, be responsible and say, I'm really sorry. I realized I crossed a boundary I shouldn't have crossed. Because I think that's the only way for, that's the way the relationship continues. That idea of mutual respect. Seamus?
Jen, can I just respond really quick to Mary Jan too?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you, love. I will say that, like I said, there was a graduation period that is taking place within all of us, right? I think about Earth as like school. We learn a lot, especially from dealing with people. And mutual respect started with me, like respecting myself, honoring myself, and honoring my, quote unquote boundaries, and looking at my children and seeing them repeating some of the same cycles, but immediately interrupting that, right? Not letting it go on, and also, speaking to other people about what I'm not willing to tolerate in a respectful way. But she was not respectful to me,
Hmm.
but I still stood my ground, and stood my position and honored, what I said. You know what I'm saying? So I just think that it was a graduation period, and I'm grateful that I handled the situation that I did. But trust and believe me, I got a lot of fire in me, and I got a lot of expression in me. And after I left that conversation with her, I let that expression out privately because I am respectful, right? But so we got to get it out regardless. Thank you.
No, I mean, very well said, because I think that sometimes that energy kind of builds up. And if we are, I want to say almost like, um, regulating ourselves, not in a bad way, like kind of like, okay, I'm going to remain calm and collected and kind in my words, but firm, then, I don't care what you do afterwards to kind of release that energy. Dance if you have to, sing a song, like, do something, because I think that, you have, yeah, celebrate in some way that you were able to maintain or be collected and still hold, like the word that means, like, that comes to mind is hold your ground. Seamus, did you want to say something?
Yeah, yeah, just on that, like in the heat of the moment, like I think that that's what's coming across as well, Divine. Like would you have the presence of mind to respond in a way that honored you and honored the other person, but completely agreed. Like it's not a, then you kind of, if you want to use the word suppress, you temporarily suppress that urge, kind of maybe react in a way that wouldn't have served you. But then at the end of the day, again, a perfect example, I think, is oh God, like yeah, and just let it go. Whatever you really wanted to say in your own space, let it go. And that like that's respecting you, you're respecting your own energy, you're respecting your ability to be able to actually manage that situation that resulted in not escalating into a terrible conflict potentially. So I think that's the power that comes from having firm, really firm, solid foundational boundaries within ourselves, that we're prepared for these type of situations that will emerge when we least expect maybe. And I think that's the power of and the foundational value of firm, clear boundaries within ourselves. That goes back to, again, I think I mentioned this every week, John, about that the whole quote around we're operating from a heart that's prepared for anything. And I think when
Right.
we have those clear boundaries, we're set up and prepared for anything that happens, and we're going to engage with ourselves and others in a way that's going to completely honor the whole idea of the pliability and the flexibility of how we engage with ourselves, because we're operating from that very secure, firm, but loving boundary that enables us to operate and share and take a stand for what we care about, but is also prepared to honor other people. And I think Divine, the example you shared, Divine, is a perfect example of how that shows up in practice, in reality, of how it can serve us in a very practical way in every engagement we have, like whether it's at home or at work or whatever. The power of that internal work, the boundaries, and the foundation of that clear boundary within that's kind to ourselves and transmits in kindness to others as well, you know. And again, I suppose the last thing, John, just briefly, was again, it goes back to the whole idea of the most natural boundary. You talked about it before between organs, but also between cells. I think I mentioned it last week as well about the completely natural, most natural foundation or boundary in the world is the cell membrane around each of our individual trillions of cells. And the very natural way that they engage and support each other within the heart, the liver, and whatever, that allow those individual components of our biology to be able to serve the cell themselves, but to serve the overall heart, liver, and the whole human being, each of us individually, out of those components from that very basic natural flow of allowing from a boundary that honors the cell itself and honors the cells around it, you know?
I love that, Seamus. And it reminds me of this whole idea, though, within the body of one of my favorite subjects was embryology, it was the development of the embryo, and that certain cells are meant to be, they're cells, or when they're dividing or whatever, there are certain cells that are programmed to be liver cells and certain cells that are programmed to be heart cells and whatever. And then they end up migrating in the body to the organ system where they're going to be, which is, an amazing process. But the fact that they are meant to be something, it's kind of like we are meant to be who we're meant to be. It's like our name, where Orshika shared about her name, and we have every right to be who we are. And and we monitor that by setting these boundaries, we're meant to be, Divine's meant to be Divine, Orshika's meant to be Orshika, Seamus, Seamus, and so on, and we have to honor and respect that in everybody else, just like hopefully everybody else has to learn and respect who we are. And then if they don't, then that's a decision we all make. Then if they don't, whether we want to continue having a relationship with that person or whether that person, for some reason is not meant to, you're not meant to spend a lot of time around those people, and then you find people who do accept you for the beautiful being that you are.
So true, Jan. I love that to surround yourself by the beautiful people that accept you for who you are, your real, true, authentic self, just allowing that to shine through. And that's what's so amazing to me about the beautiful people that gather here and in our community, is just that, you know, those are the people, they're the cheerleaders, the ones that are going to cheer you on and support you. And maybe if it warrants, even hopefully doesn't cross a boundary, sometimes they're going to say, "Hey, that hurt my feelings," like because that's other people respecting their own inner boundaries too, right? Saying, why, you know, honoring the space that's within themselves, but also um just respecting you by saying, "Hey, this is what I'm seeing." But just a reminder to us all, myself included, is this like that we are beautiful each in our own way, and it's lovely to be able to be surrounded by people at least are approaching life in a heartfelt way, in a way that's expansive for everybody, inclusive. So thank you, Jan.
Thank you, Mary Jane. Does anybody else want to share anything before we move into the meditation?
Suppose just very briefly, that point, to reinforce that point, is honoring respect. It begins with ourselves, like honoring the respect of others. We earn it through honoring and respecting ourselves as the foundation, as part of the foundation, at least, I suppose, so it begins with that, but back to the original poem of the bricks and the mortar, and we have responsibility for the type of mortar and the type of board or boundaries we're building, I think, and how porous they are. And yeah, it begins with that internal foundation that then serves us and serves others, I think. So I think that's the source, really, I suppose, maybe of this work, and the creation of healthy boundaries begins within, and then it transmits outside.
Absolutely. I think it does begin with us. And I'm not quite sure what we'll talk about next week, but one of the things that we didn't chat about much, you mentioned it a little bit, Seamus, and that is boundaries, I think, work boundaries, deadline boundaries. I think with technology, there is almost like no boundaries. Like people have forgotten, hours work, work hours, like there's this whole kind of melding of people being available in every moment and, kind ways to set boundaries with people. I was having a conversation with somebody local who does insurance and said that he, all of a sudden on Christmas morning, he got like 4 calls like in a row from a client. And he's thinking to himself, like, did he have an accident and he needs my help? I mean, it's Christmas morning. I'm with my family. And finally he picked up. And the guy said, well, I figured you would be home, so I wanted to talk about a new policy. And he's sitting there going, it's Christmas Day. Like, and so I think that there's like this almost like where people have forgotten, to and even to me, that's a boundary like you don't cross. But I almost feel like people have been so, um, I don't know, like so not focused in what's almost acceptable and what's not acceptable. And, I know I have boundaries for certain things, like work things, like hours that I don't want to communicate with people. But I think it is a little bit of challenge for a lot of people to set those boundaries in the workplace, and for fear of, losing their job or being told they're not a team player, like all the things we hear. So maybe we can have a conversation about that or anything else that comes to mind. So just leave us, send us a message. Um, are we ready to move into the meditation?
I think so. I definitely am.
Okay. Okay, great, everybody. So find a comfortable seat. Allow your spine to be tall but relaxed. Close your eyes if that feels comfortable, and take a deep breath in and slowly exhale. Let yourself settle into this space, into this moment. Feel the rhythm of your breath, steady, unwavering, like the gentle flow of a river. Begin by bringing your awareness to your body, your first boundary, your skin, which holds you, protects you. The boundaries of your physical structure keep you whole, ensuring that the fluids within you do not spill out, that your organs and systems function in harmony within their protective containers. Feel the way your breath moves in and out, your body holding it, shaping it, just as a riverbank guides water. Now take a deep breath in and breathe in as much as you can, expanding fully into the edges of your body. Feel where you begin and where the space around you begins. Hold this fullness for a moment, honoring the boundary of your physical form, and then gently exhale, releasing tension, releasing anything that does not serve you. Like the banks of a river that guide the water, your boundaries guide your energy. They help you stay steady, preventing you from being carried away by the demands and emotions of others. But just as a river may swell and shift, so too must our boundaries adapt over time. Imagine now that you are within a house, a safe, sacred space that represents your personal boundaries. The walls are strong, built with care, offering you shelter and peace. These walls are necessary. They have kept you safe in moments of frailty, in times when you needed protection. But walls are not meant to trap us. They are meant to evolve as we grow. As you breathe in, feel the strength of these walls. And as you exhale, imagine noticing where the walls can be expanded, where light and air can flow in, where doors or windows might be opened. Perhaps there are bricks that no longer serve you, walls that have become too rigid, keeping out not only harm, but also connection, love, and growth. With patience and care, visualize yourself removing one of these bricks, creating space. Space to welcome in what nourishes you, space to breathe, space to allow others to see you as you truly are. Now place your hands over your heart. Feel the warmth beneath your palms. Whisper to yourself, I honor my boundaries. I honor my space. I allow my boundaries to shift as I grow, always protecting, but never imprisoning. I honor my boundaries. I honor my space. I allow my boundaries to shift as I grow, always protecting, but never imprisoning. Take a deep breath in, letting these words settle in your heart. And as you exhale, imagine yourself standing in the middle of this sacred space, strong yet open, secure yet free. When you feel ready, slowly bring your awareness back to your body. Wiggle your fingers and toes. Gently open your eyes, carrying the awareness of your evolving boundaries with you into your day. May you move forward with clarity, strength, and an open heart. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We really appreciate each and every one of you for being here and sharing in the conversation. Take a moment to connect with us during the week, as we'd love to have a conversation with you. If you'd like to join us for a workshop, our next workshop, self-care workshop, is March 22nd. Springtime renewal, a fresh start for the mind, body, and soul. That's Saturday, the 22nd of March at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Anything else, Mary Jane? Oh, yeah, just take a moment to follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook, and maybe join our Facebook and LinkedIn communities. And also to all the recordings from these presentations and some member highlights that we've done are all located on the Spirit Born Imaginings YouTube channel. So maybe just take a moment to stop by there, like and subscribe, and yeah, and have a great week, everybody, and a great weekend.
Yes, and Zara, that's Perfectly great. We will be sharing the link for sure in the event, and then we might be doing a little bit more promotion about our YouTube channel because we'd like to invite people to go and listen to some of the inspiration there as well. So, and feel free to invite those that you know to join us here or to take in some of the information that is posted on our YouTube channel. So, thank you so much, everyone, for being here and have a blessed weekend.
Have a blessed weekend and a great week, everybody. Shine bright.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.